listeners. Welcome to the U.S. Department of State's Global Innovation through Science and Technology, or GIST, Innovation Talk on Social Innovation. My name is Khandle Hedrick. I'm a program officer at VentureWell, the primary implementing partner for the GIST initiative, and I will be your host for today. We have a great guest with us today for the GIST Innovation Talk, Kasia Weina of Evergreen Labs, a Vietnam-based company that develops and supports businesses and passionate entrepreneurs that are addressing the most pressing environmental and social challenges of our day. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Today's episode is a discussion on social innovation. This is especially important for STEM innovators who are looking to solve or are currently solving some of their own communities or the world's most pressing needs through entrepreneurship. Kasia, I know at Evergreen Labs, you and your team are aiming to change the perceptions of business, blurring the lines between social good and profitability, and focusing on the creation of sustainable impact. Can you tell us a little more about yourself and your organization and how you got into the social innovation sphere?
Sure, I'm happy to. I have a quite interesting backstory, so I'll try to keep it short. I'm originally from Wisconsin, but actually I'm a scientist by training. So I did my bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee before heading over to London to study my master's degree in drug research. And I ended up finalizing my studies in Germany, doing a PhD in stem cell and cancer research. So I don't have a background in social innovation, but over the past 6 years, I've gotten quite passionate about this topic. I moved to Asia with my partner, actually to Hong Kong first, where I established my first social enterprise focused on sustainable materials. And then we had an opportunity to move to Vietnam. And that's when we built Evergreen Labs in 2016. Evergreen Labs has transformed into what I call a creative business lab, where we're trying to create and design innovative solutions to solve pressing environmental and social challenges facing not only Vietnam, but Southeast Asia and potentially also global challenges. We do this through sustainable business creation, specifically social entrepreneurship, as we feel that this is the business of the future, that businesses should have incorporated a backbone of impact or environmental or social good within.
We're excited to learn more. Maybe we start with an explanation of the differences between a traditional nonprofit, a social enterprise startup, and a for-profit startup.
Sure. I think this is quite a common challenge, as there's different terminology and different definitions. So a traditional startup is any business, really, a commercial enterprise that's solving some sort of issue, of course. It's either through a product or a service. But the main goal, the main purpose of this organization is to grow, to increase profits, to increase shareholder value, and potentially also to exit. Right, that's quite common now in private equity. So that's a traditional startup. And I think also coming from San Francisco and Bay Area, this is the common kind of route that a lot of the tech startups are going on. Versus a nonprofit, which is actually the complete opposite. So a nonprofit doesn't care about profits. They're dedicated to the cause, right? So they're focused on a specific social cause that they want to solve or support, or an environmentally rooted cause. However, they're in constant need of fundraising. So they'll always need to get donations. They always need to work with a donor, a development agency. They even have a full team that's just working on fundraising, right? And to put social innovation or a social enterprise in that mix, it's really a hybrid of the two, I would say. So a social enterprise is a business, but it's with purpose. So it's combining purpose and profits, and it's established to create an impact, but also to make money in order to stay sustainable, right? Because you can grow your impact if you don't have to constantly be fundraising and worrying about where the next dollar will be coming from. So in my eyes, and also from Evergreen Labs perspective, that's sort of the perfect mix of two. And we think that that's what business should be focused on, especially in the future. As we're facing a lot of global challenges at the moment.
Sounds like it is the perfect marriage of both of them.
Correct. Yeah, and it's a business with a cause, with working on greater good, but also focused on a successful business model that makes it operate sustainably.
Do you think if you have a a traditional startup, do you think it could turn into a social enterprise?
You could do a few variations that would incorporate more social good into your business. Environmental good is a bit more challenging, but for example, you could hire or recruit more inclusively. So if you started, for example, if you have an operating business, but you could hire more people from disadvantaged backgrounds or from marginalized communities, that would already start to transform your business into a more socially driven cause than just for profits or for making a product or for making service.
Where do you feel there is a real need for social innovation, or are there any specific causes or areas that come to mind, especially in Southeast Asia or even other parts of the world?
Great question. The easy answer is everywhere, but I try to be more specific. So I think social innovation is needed across various industries and sectors. So it is not one specific one that really needs social innovation in particular. I think things like waste management, for example, needs a lot of social innovation, and that's also a lot of movement in that space, specifically in Southeast Asia. But textile and garment manufacturing, another big one. So all the very dirty, typical manufacturing processes. Water management, another good sector. So I think I can go on and on. The list is quite lengthy. But the ones that you can combine environmental and social good are, of course, where social innovation is needed. But typically themes are very overlapping across the globe. So things that we, for example, need in Vietnam is needed by neighboring countries, of course, in Laos or in Thailand or even in Myanmar. But we are also looking at other countries, for example, Africa, as an entire continent that needs waste management solutions. I've also spoken with people from the US who talk to me and say, oh, your solution would be great here, right? So I think there's a huge overlap in these areas, and social innovation would only lift and improve all of these sectors.
You touched on this a bit already, but can you point out the specific differences that innovators should be aware of between starting a social enterprise versus a strictly for-profit venture? Do you have to structure your business in a different way?
Yeah, that's also a good point. So I think this is greatly depending on the country of establishment. So I can speak from my perspective here in Vietnam, but in some countries you can actually register your business under a legal entity that is a social enterprise. In Vietnam, it's a little bit different as it's a new framework the government has been working on. So you actually register as a standard commercial entity or an LLC, for example, but you acknowledge to the Department of Investment that you want to be a social enterprise. And you get a certificate saying that you will dedicate 51% of your profits back into social causes. Also in Vietnam at the moment, there are currently no incentives for doing this. It's just out of the good of your own heart. But for example, in other countries, there are like tax incentives and things like that. If you were to register, it's definitely still early days for this, but there are some mechanisms in place.
If it's out of the good of your heart, how do you convince people to do this?
Well, I also don't think you need to legally register as a social enterprise to be a social enterprise, right? It's about how you're operating your business, what is your product or service, right? What's your cause? It's not like, here, look at my paper. I have a really nice shiny certificate that states I'm a social enterprise legally, right? It's how you define yourself as an organization and how you operate and what you're passionate about and what you care about. But there are in other countries, some incentives for actually registering in that legal form. And for us in Vietnam, we decided to do it also for fundraising purposes. So we can also attract, for example, get some grants in and some donations because we are a social enterprise. Nobody will donate money to a private commercial entity. Right? No. There's also some advantages in terms of fundraising, especially for early startups.
For these early stage startups and even more mature companies, how do you stay viable if you are not profit driven? How do you find a balance between the passion and the profits? And also, how do you attract talent if it's not about the money?
Yeah, that's, I think, for me, where the real innovation comes into place. So social innovation, you think of how do I incorporate a more ethical supply chains, or how do I work with marginalized communities, or how do I have zero waste to landfill? But actually, for us, real social entrepreneurs are able to create a feasible business model behind it. I think that's where the true innovation comes through, because that's when you're really creating impact, because you can grow and scale your business. And when you're doing that, you're also growing and scaling your impact. But what we're really trying to look at is the business model side, to see if there is market demand, right? Can we also make sure we have enough supply? Do we have enough input material? Things like that. We're really trying to test the model first, before we say, okay, is it a viable social enterprise to spin off? Once it kind of gets approved, I would say, through our rigorous process, then we have a really, a package of a solution plus a business model that could be transformed into a social enterprise. The second part of your question regarding talent, HR is always difficult. So I think regardless of a social enterprise or not. But what I've seen is actually giving employees and your team a purpose has actually brought us a really strong, we call them change makers, that join us. So they're really passionate about the cause. And just because we're doing social good, it's not easy work. It's actually much more challenging than you would normally have in a commercial enterprise. We're working with governments. We're trying to get donations. We're working with local farming communities, and all of these things are quite challenging. But what has helped us attract talent is actually the purpose, is actually our mission to create social impact and environmental impact. And when you build your reputation and you have some impact and you've proven yourself a bit, people really want to join that movement. And for us, it's also been the younger generations. So after university, early grads who really want to do something meaningful can really feel happy about when they go home every day and not just exhausted, right? Yeah, so my team has a bit of both. But I think it's really important that you have a clear purpose, have a clear mission, and have a product that the market would absorb. Once you decouple yourself from the continuous fundraising of a nonprofit, you can turn into a more sustainable for-profit with a purpose. Also, some advice would be look for programs or grant funding that can support you in the early feasibility work, because I think that's really supported us in our journey as well.
Yes, that whole feasibility part is so important for any organization, whether it's a for-profit or social enterprise. You have to have a good product and you have to have real customers. Have you seen the larger Southeast Asia entrepreneurial ecosystem embracing social innovation?
Yeah, I think there's been quite a movement more recently. I think over the past couple of years, it's surrounding also the trends at the moment. So I think there's quite a huge push, especially in this region, for plastic waste mitigation, as this big study came out in the Science Journal labeling, I think the top 10 countries, I think 6 of them are from Southeast Asia, that are contributing to ocean-bound plastic. So there's been a lot of development, a lot of foundation work, also some new private equity funds coming in to specifically fund entrepreneurship in this sector. And of course, if you're a business that's solving, plastic waste issues, then you're automatically a social enterprise. You have a backbone of environmental purpose. So we've seen this growth in social innovation recently, but also really driven by these sort of trends, right? Like no plastic waste, or no plastic bags, or no more plastic straws. So people are now having to come up with other solutions. And in Asia, I mean, there's so many opportunities. If bamboo and grass straws and all of it grows here. So the entrepreneurs are quite quick to move on these opportunities. But I think it goes hand in hand with the trend of, I don't want to call it a trend, but I think it's been coming out more present, these issues and more pressing issues. And also with COVID, I think there's been a lot of exposure in terms of ethical supply chains and things like that, where people are starting to consider, am I a responsible consumer? And how can I get access to more responsible goods, right? And that's also sprouted like people trying to have zero waste packaging and things like that.
There is corporate buy-in, there's consumer buy-in. Are you seeing government buy-in?
Slowly. Again, greatly depending on the country. So I don't want to speak for one government as a whole, but yeah, I think there's more pressure being put on governments, especially on the environmental side, which is great. And so more pressure in terms of renewables, also waste management and water systems and things like that. And I think COVID has also highlighted a lot of issues in terms of hygiene and sanitation. So the governments are responsible for most of those things, right? And there's also a lot of opportunities for social entrepreneurs to jump in and say, you know, I have a solution that can solve that. And actually, in one of our businesses, we're working side by side with the government. Because when you're dealing with this particular project with waste management, it's also only sustainable if you're doing partnerships with the public sector. So we're excited to include them, and we also know how important it is to make sure they're aware and that they champion our work, because that will also inspire other governments throughout the country and hopefully the region to really take action.
Social innovation represents a small number of early stage entrepreneurs. Are you seeing indications that it might be increasing? And what sectors are you most excited about for social innovators to tackle?
Yeah, I think the movement is growing, but I also hope it's not a trend. I hope that it is the future of business, and we won't only just say, oh, are you a commercial business or you're a social business? It'll just be how business is. That's my hope for the future, is we really start to incorporate all of these aspects just into our daily lives and also into our daily business. But I think that it's exciting for me now to see more existing businesses also becoming more responsible, more aware, more inclusive. They also don't have much of a choice anymore due to consumer awareness, which I think is great. And the more aware consumers get, the more pressure corporates get. And I think I mentioned earlier, but traditional CSR, corporate social responsibility, is now shifting towards these environmental social governance programs, or ESG programs. And additionally, they're also being pushed towards more certifications and more standards around business, which I think mentioned earlier include like B Corp or the Forestry Stewardship Council, or FSC for wood and things like that, which are great movements, right? Because even as a social entrepreneur and as an early startup, you're still looking up to these corporates, or you're still modeling after these examples. You see how successful they can be. So I think when we really can inspire change is when these large conglomerates and multinationals start to really take initiative and take action and start implementing. There's a really great company here in Vietnam called Cytex, and they're one of the largest denim manufacturers in the world, producing for all the major brands. And they're almost, I think, one of the most sustainable businesses I've seen to zero waste, to landfill, circularity in their water systems, because denim is also one of the dirtiest businesses, as you can imagine. They also reduce their electricity cost almost, I don't know, by half or by a fourth, because they're air drying all their jeans. So if you go to their factory, they're actually like on the ceiling, flying around.
On a fan?
Yeah. So it's really amazing. So it's like these things are also innovation, right? As you're a corporate, you're definitely involved in a very dirty business, but you can transform that. And that those sort of companies really set the groundwork, set the foundation for social entrepreneurs to think, oh my God, I could really do that, or I could service that, right? So there's great movement from both the established businesses and the early stage startups, but I think they go hand in hand. And like I said, I really hope we maybe in 10 years from now, we can chat again and we don't have the discussion of social entrepreneurship versus commercial. We just talk about business and how it's great and it's innovative and it's also inclusive. And yeah, I hope that's the future.
Hopefully. What advice do you have for early stage innovators who are considering social innovation as they form their startups?
My very simple advice would be to go for it. I highly recommend it, and I really support all social innovators and entrepreneurs. It might seem intimidating or like maybe extra work to try and innovate, but actually the decision doesn't also have to be a big decision, and you don't have to do 100% maybe social innovation at once. You can do it step by step, and I think the hiring and recruitment via marginalized communities or disadvantaged workers is really easy. I won't say easy, sorry. It was a very good first step towards inclusivity. And social entrepreneurship is done step by step. You're continuously improving your business. You're continuously making sure you're being more conscious and responsible. It's more about when you start your organization, what's the commitment? What's your purpose, right? That's what you need to decide. And I think in generally, a lot of people want to do something good. They want to make change. They want to make a product better. They want to make a service better. That's all you really are making in the early stage of your startup is what's your purpose. And if your purpose is genuinely just to make money and just to have an exit in 3 years, that's okay. That's your decision. Then that's a commercial enterprise. But if you want to do something bigger than that, also bigger than yourself, right? You're going to have a team that believes in this mission, this purpose. Then you're already a social entrepreneur. And if it's labeled as that, if you register as that, that doesn't matter. It's all about what you're committing to when you start. And I think a lot more people are actually social innovators, but don't realize it. And maybe they're confused by what that means and what they have to do to be one. But it's all about your purpose and communicating your purpose and building a team that cares about that purpose, because you then become examples for others to really take that step. And I think the more innovators we have with a good, meaningful cause, the world will be just a much, much better place.
Kasia, that's a great way to close today's talk. Kasia, Weina, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been great. Thanks, Kendall.
For our listeners, thank you for joining us. And we encourage you to check out our other Just Innovation talks by visiting our website, justnetwork.org.